This is the last known image of Trevor Deely. The 22-year-old vanished without a trace after walking past the security camera in Ballsbridge, Dublin.
We're particularly appealing to anybody that may have been in the Haddington Road, Wilton Terrace area on the early hours of the morning of December the 8th, 2000. Particularly the unknown male as depicted in the CCTV footage.
It's December 8, 2000. Eminem has released the song Stan, and The Grinch is showing at movie theatres. The controversial election between Al Gore and George Bush is still being played out in court. Meanwhile, in Ireland, taxi drivers are striking due to government plans to deregulate the industry. Outgoing US President Bill Clinton is due to visit the country in just 4 days. In Dublin, 22-year-old Trevor Deely is at a staff Christmas party in Buck Whaley's nightclub on Lower Leeson Street. As they chat and drink, his co-workers have no idea that their night out is about to become part of a mystery that will stump investigators and bewilder an entire nation for more than 2 decades. That night, Deely was facing a 30-minute walk back to his apartment. It was raining, windy and cold. There were also no taxis around due to the strike. When the IT worker left Buck Whaley's at around 3:30 AM, he walked to his workplace at the Bank of Ireland Asset Management Department, which was just around the corner. It is likely that he stopped by the building to pick up an umbrella. Deely reached his workplace at around 3:35. As he headed towards the side gate, he walked past a man who had been standing outside the main entrance for roughly 30 minutes. The man, who remains unidentified, is commonly referred to as the Man in Black due to his dark clothing. The pair had a very short conversation while Deely was waiting for the gate to open. Moments later, Deely went inside the courtyard and closed the gate, leaving the Man in Black by himself. Inside the building, Deely logged into his PC but didn't do anything of note. One popular theory is that he may have been checking his emails because he didn't have an internet connection in his apartment. Before leaving, he had a casual conversation with a co-worker who was working the night shift. At around 4 AM, Deely left holding an umbrella. By that stage, the Man in Black was gone. After fixing his umbrella, Deely headed east along Wilton Terrace. He then crossed McCartney Bridge, turned a corner and walked east along Haddington Road. It was here that a bank security camera captured the last known footage of him. What happened next remains a mystery, as no trace of Deely or his belongings have ever been found. Deely failed to show up for work the following day. Although this was out of character, his manager presumed that he was sleeping off a hangover from the night before. On the weekends, Deely sometimes went back to his hometown of Naas. However, on this occasion, his parents weren't expecting him home, as he had signalled his intent to stay in Dublin. As a result, nobody noticed that he had gone missing. Alarm bells didn't begin to ring until the following Monday, when he failed to show up for work yet again. After asking around, Deely's manager learned that nobody had talked to him since the night of the Christmas party. Concerned, he sent the following email to the HR department. "We have a problem here. This guy is not to be found. What should we do?" At that point, the bank contacted Deely's parents, who immediately sprung into action. The area around Haddington Road was checked for CCTV footage. Unfortunately, 4 days had passed before anyone realised that he was missing. This complicated matters, as most camera systems back then stored their footage on VCR tapes. These tapes were reused and recorded over every couple of days. The only business that still had footage from the night in question was the Bank of Ireland building on Haddington Road. These days, the building is occupied by a pizza restaurant called Milano. The security footage from Haddington Road showed that a dark figure appeared to be following Deely from behind. Initially, it was presumed that this man was the same man in black who was hanging around Dealey's workplace. This led to theories that someone was following the 22-year-old from afar. However, in December of 2023, it was revealed that the dark figure on Haddington Road had been identified and ruled out. It was also made clear that he was not the same man who had been standing outside Dealey's workplace. That man has yet to be identified. After leaving his workplace, Dealey used his Nokia 1610 to call his friend Glenn Cullen, who lived in Naas. The call was made at 4:06 AM, which was roughly 4 minutes after he had left his workplace. At the time, he was most likely walking along Wilton Terrace. The call went to voicemail as Cullen was asleep and had left his phone charging downstairs. Dealey and Cullen had tried calling each other earlier that night, but they couldn't hear each other due to the noise. At the time, Dealey was at a Christmas party, while Cullen was in a pub in Naas. The voicemail was trivial and there was no indication that Dealey felt concerned. In his message, he acknowledged that he had missed Cullen's call earlier that night. He then said that he was heading back to his apartment and that he would talk to him tomorrow. This was the last time that anyone heard from Dealey. His Nokia 1610, which was a popular model at the time, has never been recovered. An Irish Times article said that Dealey's sister, Michelle Dealey, called her brother multiple times that weekend and that his phone rang out. At the time, she didn't think much of it, as she did not know that he was missing. This point is often brought up when people discuss this case. However, they usually fail to mention the lack of certainty surrounding this statement. Certain networks will play a ringing tone while they are searching for the other phone. This may be significant, as Michelle was in London when she made the calls. In other words, she was making an international call to a phone on a foreign network. There are no reports that anyone else called Dealey's phone and heard it ringing out. Another piece of the puzzle is Dealey's decision to walk up Haddington Road. Dealey lived in an apartment at the Renoir complex in St James's Court on Serpentine Avenue. Haddington Road was not the quickest route back to his apartment. If he wanted to take the shortest route, he would have walked along Pembroke Road. Although Pembroke Road is quicker, humans do not operate like Google Maps. Sometimes we favour routes that are slightly longer due to other factors. Dealey was a smoker and there was a 24-hour shop somewhere along Bath Avenue. Considering he did not light up after leaving his workplace, it is possible that he was fresh out. Smokers will usually ensure that they have enough cigarettes for the following morning. Therefore, it is plausible that he wanted to buy a pack before he returned home. Dealey visited a woman in Anchorage, Alaska a few days before his disappearance. He had met the woman through friends while she was in Dublin. It seems as though he had a romantic interest in her, as he was willing to take a lengthy flight by himself to visit her hometown. However, it appears as though she didn't feel the same way, as she made excuses about being too busy when he emailed her about the prospect of him flying to Anchorage. Despite these excuses, Dealey remained undeterred. According to the Gardaí, this led to a difficult situation where he appeared out of nowhere, uninvited. Like most people, I once believed that the man in black outside Dealey's workplace was the key to this case. However, the identification of the person on Haddington Road has changed my mind. It is now clear that the person on Haddington Road was not the man in black following Dealey from behind. There is now no evidence that Dealey crossed paths with the man in black after their initial conversation. Of course, it is possible that they did encounter each other somewhere along Dealey's route home. However, it seems far less likely. One popular theory is that the man in black was part of some targeted operation and that Dealey may have been the victim of a tiger kidnapping. Personally, I highly doubt this. The man was hanging around the entrance of the bank for 30 minutes. He also appeared to make a phone call at one point. Taxi drivers were on strike that night. Therefore, he may have been waiting for someone to pick him up. Dealey was a low-level IT worker who did not have access to important information Furthermore, the asset management agency deals with stocks and land, not cash. This makes Dealey an unlikely target for criminal gangs. I also doubt that someone involved in such an operation would expose themselves by hanging around the front of the building. The footage shows that Dealey and the man initially ignored each other. The conversation between the pair seemed very brief, and Dealey's body language does not suggest that he felt threatened. In fact, it appears as though he ignored the man in black after they spoke. Dealey did not mention the man or their conversation to his co-worker on the night shift. He seemed in good form and was more interested in talking about the Christmas party. In my opinion, this indicates that the man in black talked to Dealey about something trivial. For example, he may have asked him for a cigarette or spare change. The man in question seems intoxicated, as his head drops for extended periods. At one point, he leans against the wall. When Dealey finally opens the gate, the man reacts very sluggishly and just stands there. Given the time of night and the location, I believe that it's far more likely that the man in black was intoxicated and waiting for someone to pick him up. The CCTV footage wasn't released until it was enhanced in 2017, which was nearly 17 years after the interaction took place. This man may be completely unaware that internet sleuths have spent the past few years dissecting his every movement. The Gardaí found no trace of Dealey when they searched the Grand Canal Basin and the River Dodder. Although they wanted to drain the Grand Canal Basin, they were unable to do so because it would impact the structural integrity of surrounding buildings. Dealey's case is extremely fluid, as we know nothing about his movements after 4/14. Therefore, we can only speculate about his motives and which route he took. It is difficult to pick apart the logic of a man who is walking home drunk at 4 AM, especially in such weather conditions. Anyone who claims to know the answer is only fooling themselves, as life is full of rash decisions and chance events. Suicide is a relatively popular theory due to the Anchorage situation. However, Dealey seemed to be in good spirits that night, and he did tell his friend that he would speak to him the following day. Having said that, suicide isn't always preceded by warnings. People who suffer from such thoughts can act on them very abruptly. Alcohol can also act as a trigger. Dealey staggered to his left in the CCTV footage. His co-worker on the night shift said that it was clear that he had been drinking, but that he didn't seem too drunk. People who are intoxicated can feel more alert in social situations because they are engaged in conversation. In other words, there is something to keep them focused. However, that alertness can fade away once they begin a long walk home by themselves. If Dealey did accidentally drown, then it is likely that he staggered while he was crossing a bridge over the River Dodder. On the night in question, the river had swelled due to heavy rainfall. The wall on Ball's Bridge on Pembroke Road seems too high for someone to fall over it. There are two other bridges that he may have walked across, depending on which route he took. One is by Lansdowne Road, while the other crosses Bath Avenue to the north. The River Dodder becomes tidal by these bridges. Furthermore, the walls on these bridges were relatively low until recent times. If this did happen, then he may have been swept down to the River Liffey, which flows out into Dublin Bay. Of course, there is no evidence to support this theory, as none of Dealey's belongings were ever recovered. The next obvious theory is foul play. It is doubtful that someone attacked him on the side of a road in a busy city and then moved his body without anyone witnessing anything. Carrying dead weight is not an easy task. Dealey was about 6'2", and there was still a considerable amount of people around as the Christmas party season was in full swing. If he was attacked in public, then you'd have to imagine that the offender had immediate access to a vehicle. Either that or the attack took place within touching distance of the River Dodder. Otherwise, they would have likely left him there. Another possibility is that he was the victim of a hit and run. The taxi strike and bad weather may have enticed some people to get behind the wheel while drunk. This was also 6 years before random breathalyzer tests became a thing. For example, they may have initially placed him in the vehicle with the plan to take him to a hospital, only to later realise that he had succumbed to his injuries. There was no forensic evidence that a hit and run took place. However, Dealey wasn't reported missing for 4 days. The city was also preparing for the upcoming visit of US President Bill Clinton. In that period, street sweepers may have cleaned up any broken glass or personal belongings. Another plausible theory is that Dealey went back to a private residence. Depending on his route home, he may have crossed paths with a number of dubious characters. If he did agree to go back to someone's house or apartment, then it is possible that something happened and that the occupants covered it up. For example, death by misadventure or an argument that became violent. In 2017, an informant alleged that Dealey had been shot and buried by an organised crime figure who had been operating in the area where the 22-year-old disappeared. The informant said that the murder took place during a chance encounter. Although the Gardaí searched a plot of land in Chapelizod, no trace of Dealey or his belongings were found. It is unclear whether this informant is a viable witness or not. However, investigators did note that he didn't seem to have an ulterior motive. He also showed no interest in collecting the €100,000 reward. As you can see, there is an almost endless list of possibilities. All we know for sure is that a 6'2" man walked up Haddington Road and seemingly disappeared into thin air. Due to the passage of time, it seems as though the only hope is that someone discovers Dealey's remains by chance, or that someone with a conscience comes forward with a viable piece of information.